Okay, so are you ready for this? We are diving deep into a question that might surprise you, like, who is a Muslim, really?
Yeah, it really does make you think and
Yeah,
challenge a lot of assumptions. We are going to be using the Divine Blueprint. Have you heard of that? By Payam Mustafa.
I haven't.
Okay, so he also wrote the Quran, New Millennium Exposition, and both books, they really get into the Quran itself to find answers to these big questions.
Interesting. So that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Right.
We're looking at this article and how it answers that question, maybe in ways we don't expect.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, take the Shahada, right? A lot of people associate that with Islam.
Right.
It's the declaration of faith. There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. You'd think, like, that's central to being Muslim.
Yeah, that's always what I'd understood.
Yeah.
So is this article saying that that's not actually required, that exact phrasing by the Quran?
Yeah, that's the surprising thing. The Quran itself seems to be more focused on submitting to God alone, not elevating anyone alongside him. So it's like, where did that Shahada even come from?
Yeah, okay. So how did it become so important if it's not from the Quran? Like, where'd it come from?
That's where these hadith come in.
Oh, okay.
They're like commentaries. You can think of them as commentaries on the Quran written centuries later
Okay.
that offer like different interpretations, and the article traces the Shahada back to them.
So they're adding on to
No.
the original text.
Right. Yeah, and that's where you get into all these issues of, sex developing and different practices
Right.
because of these hadith. But the Quran, the article points this out, it actually condemns forming sex
Hmm.
and emphasizes unity as essential for progress. So it's more about understanding and living by the Quran's message, not interpretations that divide people.
That's an interesting point. It seems like relying on the Quran alone could lead to a more unified understanding of Islam.
Yeah, exactly.
So if the Quran doesn't specifically say the Shahada is required, what does it offer instead? Like how do you declare your faith according to the Quran?
So the article uses Abraham, the prophet Abraham, as an example. When God asked him to submit, Abraham said, I submit myself to the sustainer of the universe.
Mm,
Very simple.
right.
No other names, no pronouncements.
That's a very direct and powerful statement.
And it emphasizes that submission to God's will,
Yeah,
which seems to be at the core of what it means to be Muslim.
absolutely.
And plus, the Quran also states that God's own witness is enough. You don't need another authority to validate your faith.
Okay.
No other authority is equal to God.
So you're saying it challenges this idea that you need to prove your faith outwardly,
Yeah.
like through declarations and rituals.
Yeah. It really shifts the focus to your internal connection with God.
Hmm.
Less about, saying the right words and more about aligning your actions with divine guidance.
So you're saying it's not enough to just say you believe. You have to actually live it. What does the Quran say about that?
Well, the article mentions this law of requital,
Hmm.
which is basically saying that you're accountable for what you do, not just what you say.
Okay.
It's like there's this cosmic balance sheet, of your actions, not just the declarations of faith.
That's really powerful. Makes you really think, like, how are you living your life? Not just what you're labeling yourself as. But, I mean, this focus on action over words, doesn't that kind of go against how a lot of people understand the 5 pillars of Islam?
Not necessarily. The Quran sees faith as something that's lived out. And that's where those pillars come in. It's not just like a checklist of rituals. You know what I mean? It's about guiding your actions, shaping your character.
So how would you say the Quran views that connection between faith and action then?
Well, it sees them as inseparable, really. Like true faith isn't just believing, it's about aligning your values and your actions, like what we do, with what the Quran teaches.
Hmm. So it's not just about the rituals. It's more about how you're living your life on a daily basis.
Right. It's embodying those principles, not just going through the motions.
Yeah, the article really emphasizes that the Quran values sincerity,
Yeah.
actually living by those teachings.
It makes me think, this deep dive, we're focusing on Islam, but it makes you think about faith more generally.
Yeah.
A lot of religions have that tension, between just outward stuff versus really living it out.
It's a universal struggle, isn't it? Trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to make your actions match what you believe. And the Quran seems to be pushing back on this idea that you can just say the right words and you're good.
It's like saying to really understand what it means to be Muslim, you got to look beyond just the cultural and historical interpretations and get to the core message of the Quran.
Exactly. Yeah, back to the source. understanding it in that original context.
This whole shahada discussion has been really eye-opening. But the article also mentions other values too, like justice and compassion that the Quran emphasizes. Could you maybe talk about that a little more? Yeah, sure. So the Quran, it advocates for treating people with kindness and fairness, like no matter their background or beliefs. And it also emphasizes the importance of social justice, helping those in need.
It connects back to that idea of unity, doesn't it? Avoiding those sects that we were talking about before.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about recognizing our shared humanity and
Yeah.
working towards a better world, more just, equitable.
What would you say are some of the other values that are emphasized in the Quran?
Well, honesty and trustworthiness are really important too. The Quran, it encourages being truthful, both in our words and in our actions, living with integrity.
Those are pretty universal. You see those values across different philosophies.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, and that's part of what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. We're exploring these principles of faith and how they can apply to us, even regardless of what our beliefs are.
So even though we're talking about being Muslim, this article touches on broader themes about just living a good life, being a good person.
It's about aligning your actions with what you believe and striving to live in a way that really reflects those values.
It's been really interesting looking at how the Quran wants us to understand these teachings
Yeah.
on their own,
Yeah.
rather than relying on what people have said later on.
Right. Yeah. It encourages us to go to the source material directly and consider how its message might be relevant to us today.
It's almost like it's saying, don't just take our word for it. Go read it yourself. See what it has to say.
Right. Form your own understanding.
Yeah.
Based on the text itself.
So for someone who wants to explore these teachings themselves, what would you say is a good place to start?
Well, the Divine Blueprint, the one that we've been talking about, and the Quran, New Millennium Exposition, both by Pagam Mustafa. They offer a really, really fresh perspective, insightful interpretations of the Quran. Its principles are very universal.
Okay, so they sound like some good resources for anyone who wants to get a better understanding of the Quran's message.
Definitely, yeah. They offer a different perspective on the teachings and offer insights into those universal and timeless principles.
It's been a really thought-provoking dive. This whole question of who is a Muslim, we've really challenged some of those common assumptions.
It's been great talking about all of this with you, and I hope that our listeners are thinking about faith and identity in a new way.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that true faith, it goes beyond just words. It's about our actions, aligning those with our beliefs, and striving to make our lives reflect the things that are important to us.
Well said. Yeah. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder these ideas, encourage you to keep exploring.
What really stood out to me, I think, is how it's encouraging us to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
even about things we think we know, and to go back to that source, engage with the core teaching. And how does that connect to our lives today? It's don't just have this blind faith, have an active faith.
Yeah. That's a really powerful takeaway. It's about understanding, reflecting, and really living by those values, not just passively accepting them.
And this whole idea that actions speak louder than words, I don't know, it makes you think about how you're living your own life, regardless of your beliefs, really.
Yeah, it's a challenge for everyone, isn't it? Trying to live in a way that matches what we believe in.
For sure. So for our listeners who are intrigued and maybe want to explore this more on their own, where would you point them?
Well, the books we've been talking about, The Divine Blueprint and the Quran, New Millennium Exposition, both by Pagam Mustafa, if you want to delve deeper into this perspective on the Quran. And Islam as a whole, I highly recommend them.
Yeah. Sounds like they're great resources for understanding the Quran's message.
Definitely. Yeah, they offer a fresh perspective on the teachings and some really great insights into these universal principles that are timeless,
Look, this has been fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
Really diving deep into this question of who is a Muslim, really.
It has been a pleasure unpacking all of this with you.
Absolutely.
I hope our listeners have a new way of thinking about faith and identity. It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, it's been great. And it's a good reminder that true faith, it's more than just words or rituals.
Right.
It's about aligning our actions with our beliefs and trying to make our lives reflect those values.
Beautifully said. And with that, we'll leave you to contemplate these ideas. Keep exploring. If you wish to learn more about Islam as presented in the Quran, we recommend Payham Mustafa's The Divine Blueprint and the Quran, New Millennium Exposition. Both books are invaluable resources for understanding the universal and timeless principles of the Quran.